I am Josh Levine, and welcome to the 26th episode of Private Market Insights. This is our conversation series where we discuss important topics related to the small business M&A industry. Please subscribe to our show on YouTube or anywhere where you get your podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Apple Music, etc. I am the co-founder and CEO of Private Market Labs. We're a platform designed to democratize the small business acquisition process, connecting people with targeted deal flow based on their acquisition thesis. We have a really interesting topic today. Our guest is Tom Lenfestey, the founder of the Law Practice Exchange. And Tom is here to talk about something that we may not have thought about a whole lot, but something that's definitely relevant for our community, which is law firm M&A. So, we've heard of a lot of these cyclical changes in the market, right? Dental offices, home services, et cetera. Law firms have typically been immune to some of this trend, in part because of regulation and specifically by the American Bar Association and other kinds of regulation. Now we're seeing some shifts, which could make law firms a much more attractive M&A opportunity going forward. So Tom's going to talk to us a little bit about that. We're so happy to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Josh. Excited to be here, talk about something that is, of course, near and dear to my heart. Maybe, for others, it's a more interesting outside topic, but absolutely, law firms buying, selling, the marketplace that it is. Glad to talk about it.
Fantastic. So we'll just jump right in. You and I have chatted a little bit in the past about how the changing regulatory framework could make law firm acquisitions more possible and more common in coming years. Can you talk through some of those existing regulations and how they inhibit law firm acquisitions right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So in law, there's, the ABA, the American Bar Association, has their model rule 5.4. Each state has adopted, for the most part, a variation of that. In other professions, right? I'm a CPA as well, right? There's, structure that is how CPA firms are supposed to be owned. ABA rule 5.4 is the same for lawyers. It first starts out with lawyers should be independent, right? You should not be swayed. You should be able to give independent advice, serve your clients well, anything else. And that is the goal of it. But then it goes into kind of, limiting the structures based on the fear of that independence, right? Is kind of where the baseline comes from of who can own a law firm or what different structures are there for law firms and law firm ownership and everything else. And that's where law, candidly, in today's world is almost standalone from some of these other professional industries, in that has been the place where it says, hey, lawyers, you have to be 100% lawyer-owned law firms, right? Traditionally. But that started to change. And it started to change in some foreign markets. It changed in DC years ago. But, the UK and Australia back in the early 2000s added alternative business structure. And so they basically said, hey, we want to now kind of open that up to allow non-attorney owned law firms, which they call ABS, or alternative business structure. DC has a very limited rule to do that here in the US. And then in 2019, Utah kind of jumped into the space by doing what they call a sandbox. They're kind of testing non-attorney ownership. So they have some, test firms in that and everything else. And then Arizona in 20 really jumped to say, we're going to change the law. So they changed their rule 5.4 to allow non-attorney ownership and alternative business structures for law firms. The purpose behind all of these changes, the main purpose behind it has been access to justice. So it's trying to bring, where the US has so much legal, but actually the access to that legal, because it's so expensive for the normal consumer or anything else, it's a pretty big gap. Like where the US stands on making sure its population has access to legal justice is pretty down in the rankings. And so, Arizona in its attempt to do that, Utah and otherwise kind of has said, let's bring some innovation. And we believe innovation is going to come with non-attorney ownership, opening it up to alternatives and kind of structure from there. So we've got, a bunch of states that have examined it from committee. Law moves slow, so that's kind of settled in some or otherwise. But that's really the movement. So now we're seeing Arizona really open up to private equity investment, different, even family office structure where you have an attorney, a CPA, and a wealth manager, right? You're seeing these different structures kind of come into play to, again, be creative, right? Create more, invest in the firm, the business model itself, and hopefully, in a sense, do better, do more through creativity and through outside funding that comes with it.
Yeah, that's a fantastic overview, and I have so many questions coming out of that. We're going to hit all of them. In terms of this access to justice, I just want to put like a point on that because it's a really fascinating concept, which is really is it around the idea that the cost of legal services could be brought down if sort of more capitalist and competitive models are brought into the law firm industry. So, for example, if you had a group that was designed to say, hey, we're going to compete on price and we're going to compete on price with slightly different structures of legal access, that would be ultimately a public good. And that's sort of the interest that is propelling some of this forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, there's so much technology change, right? With AI and everything moving. And in law, in our space, being an intermediary for law firms, we get to see all these law firms who are, some independently trying to do the same thing as the one over here, right? So it's small businesses, no, collection of trying to invest slowly, but they're investing their own dollars, right? And so they're having to say, oh, do I, pay that profit out so I can go do this? And traditionally in law firms, it's largely been about pull all profit out, whether it's in the form of compensation or anything else. At the end of the year, there's no dollars, profit or as minimum as you need to keep working capital. And that changes with, again, different structures. It's more invest in the business, invest in technology, invest in service. And when the money doesn't have to come specifically from the lawyer or the knowledge, right, is outside technology or outside expert marketing or outside expert client service, the ability to do more, hopefully with less, is there. So to your point is, yes, it's able to, invest in a platform that can help more, hopefully for a lower cost. And a lot of times keep the margins the same because most law firms right now are running on expensive labor. Right. And so, that's when legal fees go up. It's typically because if we look at like COVID, where there was this high demand on labor, there was a high demand on lawyers. And so a lot of lawyers, received higher paying jobs, but then the legal fees went up to clients to compensate for that because hire an expensive person or, get an expensive machine, pass that on to the consumer. Where in this aspect, the hope is, hey, let's innovate. And let's innovate for law firms to help lawyers have better lives, better work-life balance, have clients have better service, have clients have more cost-effective services, but really for the greater good and share that a little bit more and not just put it on, small law firm owners' backs, but, look into the outside to help innovate.
And so you talked about there are a number of places, both inside the US and other countries, where law firms don't have to be owned by lawyers. How has that gone so far? So, for example, what does the investment, landscape look like for law firms in Australia, for example, or in some of these other areas?
Yeah, absolutely. So we see, private equity owned firms in Australia, in the UK, in certain European markets, otherwise because they have allowed this. So, they switched to alternate business structure, which some law firms, went to and said, hey, we're going to be an ABS in the UK. And then, later, private equity came in as an investor, a partner, or a buyout. The lawyers still run and deliver the legal services, right? It's just professional ownership management from that aspect. And so we've seen those firms largely, be successful. I mean, if you look at some of the UK has better stats probably than Australia, or they've tracked it a little bit better, but actually like client complaints for those ABS firms are lower than they are in non-ABS firms, right? So it's the client service, and everything else is kind of a little bit better. And then you see those firms actually have, growth for culture, growth for team, right? They're able to do a lot of things that the traditional law firm just hasn't been able to. Because if I'm a lawyer and I own a law firm, I've got two sources. I can dig into my pocket and pay through profits, or I can go borrow money to do it, but it's all on my shoulders. And through these, foreign markets, you're seeing where, like investment is being contributed and professional management is there to keep things going when lawyers are busy taking care of the clients. And you're seeing firms grow. and you're seeing service hopefully improve. And in today's world, I think that's the biggest thing with consumers, whether they're business or they're individual consumers. Like, we just expect technology, right? Like, we expect to be able to log in somewhere and check the status of our, our case or our matter and anything else. And where there's legal software to do that, it's so fractionalized. Building something for your business, your law firm, right now is on our shoulders. But if we wanted to do it and we could have a partner that's private equity who's done it with other businesses and everything else for an excellent client service, those are the really cool opportunities I think that we've seen in the UK, we could see here through Arizona and otherwise, and hopefully in other states as it changes.
So we talked about the system at large. Let's talk about the investor, themselves, right? So why would an individual buyer or a private equity firm want to buy a law firm? So what are some of the dynamics at play that make this industry attractive?
Yeah, law firms are profitable, usually year after year, right? I mean, it is typically a rarity because lawyers and law firms are pretty flexible, right, to vary. It's like, corporate M&A, especially during, 21, 22 was like all-time high, everything else. And so everybody's doing M&A. Well, as things shift and go the other way, if there's litigation, right, and we go into recession, lawyers move from the M&A teams over to doing litigation, right? And so there's economic, waves to be able to ride. There's some economic, overall resistant practice areas out there as well. And the biggest thing is, like, I'm a business lawyer that dealt with businesses, and every time we go, they'd say, have you ever had a year that you've truly lost money as a law firm? And the answer to that is usually no. But businesses lose money, in certain years all the time. One is our margins are, bigger than some of those service businesses, construction related businesses otherwise. And then the other is we're pretty flexible, right? As far as moving with that, adding, recession thriving practices like go into bankruptcy, creditor collection, right? Everything else. And also ones that, when things are going well, it's skyrocketing also. So profitability, the ability to flex. And I think the other is right now what you're seeing is it's a very fragmented, industry because there is no consolidation, right? These businesses, these law firms are out there. Essentially, there's a lot of room to bring professional ideas, business management, technology to them that would improve their margins pretty significantly. But each of these law firms are out there, whether they're a $2 million law firm or they're a $100 million law firm, they're trying to do it on their own, right? They're really going through it. And, we see them doing kind of the same thing, maybe at different scales, but they're trying to figure out on their own versus having somebody who's like, this is how you do it, and bringing that in and really pushing that forward for them to develop a better business platform.
Love it. Yeah, that's fascinating, and that's really the kind of like actionable insights that I know our community is going to take to heart. So thinking about our audience a little bit further, the people who tend to listen to this pod are often buyers of small businesses, aspiring buyers of small businesses, investors. What are some of the ways that this population would analyze a law firm for sale? What are some of the key elements of a transaction or elements of a law firm that, if you were analyzing a law firm or you had a buyer looking at one of your listings, what should they be thinking about and looking at as they're reviewing a listing or reviewing a SIN?
Yep, absolutely. I think the first thing to understand is practice area matters, right? Mm-hmm. So practice area typically in a law firm, if it's a personal injury practice, that's a different type of business than maybe a estate planning practice, right? I mean, there's commonalities and everything else, but it's just a different type of business. So we get a lot of, outside investors, we get a lot of attorneys that are like, I want to buy everything. But really what it is looking at what would fit for the model that potentially you want to, buy in or invest in, because each of those are a little bit different, right? From that aspect and everything else. So practice area matters based on business structure, how they market, how they do business, the margins that you should see in that business. Is it multi-state? Is it an individual state? Those different things. The other is law is still, largely a people business. And so most of those businesses out there from the professional side, like a good analogy would be in the dental world, for years it was always referring to this dentist, and everything else. And then dentists got more into, SEO, website marketing, local, everything else. But our specialists, your specialist dentists, the ones that do the root canals, everything else, they still rely on those referrals. And you still see a lot of small law firms that are built based on the referral network. And, they're built based on taking care of clients over and over again. So law is still a people business, right? People are assets that, can be moved and transitioned, but it's not just the numbers. It is making sure that you can, take somebody who's built a multi-million-dollar, law firm, and they've got great relationships, everything else. They've got great marketing that brings in this. But how do you transition that out? What we always call, the transition plan, to make sure you preserve what they have, and, kind of carry that forward. And that's a lot what we've seen in the dental space through the DSO models and everything else is like, no. Dr. Smith, you've done a great job. We don't want to change your name of your firm, anything else. We want to keep that. And we'll just come in, to help manage, improve technology, marketing, methods, everything else.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I wonder do you see buyers coming in where they'll have an alignment with a particular practice area? So for example, do you have like a buyer coming from like a healthcare wing of a consulting firm saying, hey, I'm going to buy a healthcare focused law firm? And do those types of synergies tend to matter? Like, is that sort of something like, as we dig in on, buyer seller fit, is that something that matters at all?
It matters. I mean, we see it, from the standpoint of like right now, probably our most active is personal injury, right? Private equity has been in the lending space for personal injury attorneys, plaintiff, mass tort, this big litigation. They've been in the lending space for that. And so now we see some of them moving into the potential ownership or investment space. Instead of just being a lender, they will be an investor or an owner, from that structure. And so we definitely, see that aspect already where they're focused and say, this is what we know. And then on the other side is, we've had, to your point, an example of hospitals, we've had like benefit plans who say, we do all of this and we offer these plans like cafeteria plans for everything. Man, it would be great if we have, this lawyer, right? This law firm that we can help, kind of offer and control costs, improve the service, everything else. And so, yes, we've had some of those, looks where it's just a fit. It fits that piece that they're looking for in their already existing business model, or to like private equity, they've already invested in wealth management, or they're already in accounting, or they're already in over here. Man, law would fit that, void in their portfolio to really, monetize that. I mean, with any business, you want, the acquisition or the merger of two to be 1 + 1 = 3. And in law, it can be exponential. I mean, it can be that exponential because if you're looking and saying, look, we have this great, accounting, practice or this great technology that we can feed them clients to it. That's really where things kind of hit is that strategy and making sure they really have that criteria nailed down. Then it's just about going out and finding the right fit for them.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. What are some of the challenges? Let's go to the other side, right? What are some of the challenges that a non-attorney might face when it came to buying and owning a law firm?
Yeah, I think, first and foremost, it's, there's still the ethics and regulation, right? So we still have here in the US, you're still looking at Arizona and somewhat Utah and somewhat DC as the markets to do that. So that's the restriction first and foremost. What we've seen in Arizona is a lot of, ABS structures in Arizona. And then the question is over the next few years, will they stay in Arizona? Right. And the belief is no. Arizona is only so big. It's a good enough market. But, Josh, you're in Texas, I think, right?
Yeah.
Right. So, hop, skip, and a jump over New Mexico. And those firms, will be, in Texas. And so it's looking at how they do that, right? Is that under a DSO, LSO type structure to really move through and, come to the vast Texas market and opportunity that's there. So I would say ethics and regulation, just to know that, right? There's the opportunities, but you have to make sure you're going to come in with good ethics counsel. Look at that just like they would under accounting, dental, any of the other professional businesses. but law has a few more years to catch up to those businesses. The other is what I would say is it's still a people business. And the traditional law firm that is out there, the owners, it is their baby. It is their legacy. And I know so many that probably listen and are active on your platform, see this. But overall, to lawyers, since they have that professional responsibility, they do want to know, like, what's the plan, right? Kind of thing. And based on a people business, the plan has to involve that you're going to, transition, right, that owner out, because typically on especially small law firms, they're active. They're active in taking care of clients. They're active in, producing, new client opportunities, anything else. They're not typically sitting in the owner's seat. We have some that definitely are, but if they're active, it's what would be that transition plan to really move them right over time. And honestly, some of them just want, an exit strategy and a good succession plan, but are happy to keep practicing law for years to come, right? As I say to everybody, lawyers don't go from 100 miles an hour to zero well. So we like to kind of, slow ramp them, off, and most of them enjoy that better than having nothing to do after they've been working 6 days a week prior to that.
Yeah, that absolutely tracks. The lawyers in my personal network, I can't imagine any of them going from 100 to zero in 6 months. That would be that's a really good point. As a sell side advisor, you see buyer inquiries on the deals that you're working on. What makes a good buyer in your eyes? What types of buyers, when they approach you, they're either those initial conversations, how do you just say, hey, this buyer is going to be good, I know they're going to do a good job?
Yeah, of course, in our space, it's, they've researched the space. I mean, we're happy because we know we're in a niche space, law firms. But if it's something where they've reached out and said, hey, we are interested, researching, listening to this podcast, right? Following along, like reviewing Forbes articles, right? All of these other things, like to understand where it is. But specifically, and this goes for any of our lawyer, non-lawyer investor potential buyers, is know what your buyer criteria is. And that's really understanding, that practice area, right? Kind of model. What practice area do you want? What is that, specific buy strategy that you're looking for? Because that's going to help really pinpoint, where you're going, what type of, law firm size you probably want, what's the structure, because the structures will be dictated based on that. Is it going to be a sole owner, which deals are always easier to get done with sole owners, or is it going to be a 10-partner firm, which is going to be a little bit tougher to get done from that standpoint? So I would say knowing what your buy strategy is, having researched that, everything else, knowing your acquisition criteria, like practice area, location, those size, the more you can tell us, the easier it is for us to go out and, match or find the opportunity for you. And then the rest of it is really, the team. And so as we're dealing with some of these, private equity investment, they have ethics counsel on staff. I mean, it's part of their team as they're exploring this, because they know each state's going to be a little bit different. How are they going to look at structure, right? If they're in Arizona. So it's having the right team in place to do that. And of course, it never hurts to make sure your funding's in order. So funding is always that key part, but sure, usually less of a risk. But the biggest thing is typically that buy side strategy. Like, what are you looking for? What works for what you're building? And if you don't know what that is, I mean, we help clients do that all the time, is develop it because of our industry knowledge that will work for them. But then you go search before you find yourself in conversations 6 months for something that really isn't a good fit.
Yeah, and you touched on something here that, particularly in the context of the broader conversation around shifts in the SBA lending rules and things like that, is these partnership structures. So do you find, is it, in your opinion, do the changes in terms of partial ownership or partial buyout or things like that, do they make this process much easier if you're approaching a law firm that has, 4 partners on? I mean, partnership model is very common in law firms. So I'm curious about that. How did this play?
Absolutely. I think the changes are great. As we've worked through with our SBA lenders, one of the biggest hurdles that we had previously was, hey, if you sell, you got to be gone in, a year, right? Like, you need to be gone. Well, in our world, part of the preservation is keeping that seller around,
Right.
to introduce, to network. They may be done working, but it's like, hey, this big client that's 20% of the firm revenues would love to see you at lunch. Well, they should show up to lunch, right? And there should be some kind of ongoing arrangement. So that was a limiting factor, which, now that the rules are a little bit more open, plus on the multi-partner, doesn't have to be the full structure. It opens it up for, again, non-attorney structure. If it's in Arizona, other states, other jurisdictions, it opens it up from there just to make it more flexible, because typically you want the lawyer involved, right? Like you want the lawyer to be participating and have that as part of the structure. And a lot of our lawyers aren't done being entrepreneurs. They're just, they've gotten to a point where they think they've gotten it as far as they can. And so they really are looking for who can we, help create our succession, our exit strategy. But we're happy to stay in, or the next generation wants to be in. And that's the nice part about the SBA as well, is offering that opportunity. Like, sure, this founding member is going to stay in. These next generation are going to come in, and this outsider is going to come in to bring it all together.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm going to open it up for questions here in 1 minute. So I have one more question for Tom that I'm going to ask, but I encourage everybody to use the chat function, no matter what platform you're viewing this on, to ask whatever questions you have of Tom. We're going to go to you in just a moment. But as you sort of prepare to get some questions from the audience, do you have any stories to share, about your experience working in this niche area, things that you think our audience might find interesting?
Yeah, absolutely. So, a couple stories over the last few years. I go around to legal conferences talking to lawyers about buying, selling, exiting, succession planning for law firms. And it's really been interesting in the last, I'd say, 2 years of, going to this, and, it's starting to swirl, right? So the topic of, non-attorney ownership, everything else. And about a year ago, I was at a conference, and really the questions were, is private equity my buyer, right? And this is personal injury firms. It's really like, is this, my buyer? Are they coming in? And even though this is a slow moving market, everything else, I thought one of the greatest, kind of responses to that is, look around. Private equity and this market is going to open up. It's a question of when, right? And it's a question of really, what do you want to be as that happens? Do you want to be a partner, right, with private equity as part of this growth strategy and everything else? Do you want to just exit out? Or do you want to compete, against them or in your space or anything else? And so I do think that holds true. It's really looking at, where things are moving. The benefits to access to justice are going to come from changes. What those changes involve regarding Rule 5.4 or anything else, but they will have to come through changes. Because right now it's just, lawyers on an island, everything else is pretty limited. So as that regulation opens up, and whether it's private equity, other changes, anything else, it provides that opportunity. And there's so much shared knowledge in the business world that could be applied to law to make it better. I think that'll be an exciting opportunity. The other ones are, I think a lot of people, when you think about, especially in small business, you think about law being, hey, your neighborhood lawyer or your, mega firm or anything else. In our world, we get to see really unique platforms. So we get to see, stories as, an owner who hasn't been in headquarters in 10 years makes 10 million EBITDA a year, right? On a firm that just keeps going, right? We get to see, firms that have built out using, software and industrial engineers and are running a 60% profit margin, with full, YouTube marketing, everything else that's pulling it. So it's not always your traditional, that's a lot of what we see, but it's also these, models that are there that are just, they built it, and they built it being lawyers, which is tremendous, I think, for them. Like one of them was like, it was weird, 20, 30 years ago, we started using email, and everybody's like, I can't believe you're using email, right? And, and everything else from that standpoint. And they're like, we just kind of kept that as part of our culture, like to invest in the next aspect, but they did it on their own. And the hope is in the future, there will be more help out there for lawyers and law firms to not have to do it on their own, and to hopefully create better environments for those lawyers to, work in to deliver the legal services, but also to help clients and, focus the financials. If you look at UK and everything else too, the margins really haven't changed. They potentially improved. It's not like new technology came in and totally dropped everything. And with things that we have emerging, with artificial intelligence, everything else, it's kind of like the way of the CPA, right? The CPA firms figured out that consulting and advisory is, where you want to be. And I think law is going to move that direction as well.
Fantastic. What are some of the most interesting or creative changes you've seen a non-lawyer make when they've stepped into a law firm acquisition? Anything that strikes your memory of things that people did that were particularly unique or particularly successful?
Yeah, I think the biggest is really to open up digital marketing, right? Is to really look at, most lawyers have, marketed while they, are in working hours, anything else. And as, the next generations come in to really say, this is how we're going to market, and watch how that moves the needle for that firm, right? And also shifts a lot of what I'd say, the culture of the firm, right? Like you can see it kind of moves to where we're not behind closed doors and locked in cubicles and everything else, but now we're kind of a living, breathing, out there, alive, fun, environment firm. And so I've really liked to see that kind of as a generational shift. The other aspect I would say is, we see it a lot of just technology move, right? We had a transaction a few years ago, but openly our sellers were really worried about doing the deal with the buyer who had his own firm, because they're like, we just don't know how he's going to handle all of this, right? We're worried he's not going to be able to do it. And we had, a post follow-up, like a month or so after the deal. And they're like, it's amazing. Do you know what what he could do? He's got this software that does this. And so those are the cool stories though, because what we're able to see is, a business has been built. There's value there. And it's just those simple changes, like bringing a practice management software, for this real estate practice, so that more can get done in less time or in different locations or other things. And to really see the clients are still serviced, the value is still taken care of. But overall, we're able to do it just in a little different way. And that's really, Josh, on the side, one of the things with access to justice is our rural communities, like in, small towns right now. And we have that challenge too. Small town lawyers, it's hard to find your successor, right? And so we do have some law firms, and hopefully we'll have more, non-law firms looking at how to serve those communities under a different, cost-effective measure. But it is a challenge. It's a challenge to get, a generation, the next generation, to move to small town, anywhere to really serve. And so we have retiring attorneys that say, look, if you can find somebody to take over my firm, there's 4 other attorneys I know that are going to be retiring in the next 5 years. And there's nobody to really step into that. And that's part of the access to justice problem too. But where I really believe, innovation and outside is really to say, great, maybe there's not a lawyer in that market. Maybe it's, paralegal driven services, or there's different, technology and other services that can come into play. But I think that's part of the excitement, and changes yet to come.
Fantastic. I love that answer. That you have to. So one piece of information that maybe some of our audience knows. I don't know if you know this, Tom. My background is in public policy as a profession. So I come to sort of M&A, not through the traditional kind of PE route, but really more on this public policy side. And so you talk about the way that kind of all of my worlds are colliding in this like force for good and profit. It like makes every hair on the back of my neck stand up. So exciting. I'm going to give the audience one more chance to ask Tom a question. I have one more question here that we've prepped already, and then anyone in the audience is welcome to ask. If Tom is just doing too good of a job and you don't have any questions, or you're completely spellbound, that is also totally okay. But last question that I have here is, so what do you, and I ask this question to a lot of our guests, what are you looking forward to now that we're more than 2 months into 2024 when it comes to the SMB acquisition space? And what do you see coming down the pipeline for law firm specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. For us, overall in the SMB space, I love to see, again, how it's opening up, right? Just the non-traditional, investor moving into the market. I mean, some of the guests that you've had, Josh, right? On the podcast and everything else. I think it's very exciting. One of the reasons that, I started the Law Practice Exchange is to give owners of law firms an option for exit, right? Which they didn't have before. And so, of that structure, it's like if you owned a law firm, if you work for a law firm, you can just quit and leave, right? But, in that ownership space or anything else. So I think it's really exciting to see movement, right? Because I believe that will have more people investing in their business model because they know that's an asset that they can monetize, right? In a, more opportunities that weren't maybe available, or there was too many gatekeepers telling them, oh, no, you can't sell that type of business. Build the business and hopefully you can sell that. So I love to see where 24 goes. Hopefully interest rates keep coming down because that'll make it good for, everybody, right? That'll be a good thing. And then in the law firm space, our real goal is building the marketplace. So we've got some exciting things that we're working on moving forward as well. But, for law firms, I think the greatest part is we are seeing buyers outpace sellers, at least 5-1. And that doesn't mean that every buyer is has that buyer strategy is ready to go.
Soon to be
right?
6 or 7-1 after this podcast. We're gonna be running to it, right? So.
Bring them on. Our team will be super excited. Super excited to have more calls. And I think the overall aspect of that is, that's great. And again, it's just moving, our lawyers into looking and saying, hey, this is an option. And this is an option that could work for me. And, pairing those with good buyers and really making the market move, because it does have the benefit when we see just traditional generational, changes from one to law firm. We see the value that's been built, the knowledge, all that mentorship shift over to the next generation. And it's so great to see it continue forward and evolve instead of that first generation just kind of slowing down, winding down, getting to the point where they're the last one in the office at their desk at 85. That's not a good plan. And so our goal is to, hopefully do more of those. And we're excited to see, the growth and build do that.
Fantastic. We do have some questions from the audience. So we have a user from LinkedIn that has asked 2 questions. First, what are a couple of practice areas? I know you mentioned personal injury. Are there any other, really attractive acquisition targets from a practice area standpoint that you're seeing buyers really flock to? And the second question is, it seems like a lot of these opportunities might be on the small side in terms of, EBITDA or STE, but are you seeing private equity firms and, independent sponsors, traditional searchers, et cetera, showing interest in buying medium-sized law firms? And, what do those transactions look like?
Yep, absolutely. So to the first question, yes, typically personal injury is very active for us, but we like any practice area that's really, a focused practice area and, kind of a repeat. So personal injury is, they have a process, right? It's not, M&A has a way to sit and go complex and go all over here and everything else. But we like repeat. So immigration is another area that we're really big on. Even real estate, that goes somewhat with the economy, but real estate is an over and over, and it can be process driven, right? Personal injury, immigration, patents and intellectual property. That's part of what we've seen on the global scale in UK, where we've dealt with those private equity backed firms over there, is they're buying and scooping up intellectual property firms because, one, you're picking up great clients. These are, international corporate clients, everything else that they can then offer other services to. The other aspect to that is, patent prosecution, anything else from that side can be process driven, right? You can have a kind of a strategist, so to speak, but really then kind of move that through so that you can help. And then out of that comes patent litigation, which is, hugely profitable, and everything else from that side. Workers' comp, insurance defense are all areas that we see probably more movement in as well. But it's, again, repeat. You're building a bigger, I'll call it machine, to service and really focus on those process. Estate planning as well. I mean, we've got firms, out west that are picking up their 40th, 41st estate planning practice. And they're really just looking at that geographic hub and spoke type model. So anything where you can really centralize that process and really grow through that. The profitability on those, different practice areas probably varies a little bit, but the opportunity is definitely there, and great margins are there to get a hold of it. And then on the other aspect of, small side, anything else, typically what I'd say is most of the medium to large ones are in private market, non-published. And so what we're seeing, like we have a firm right now that's got a 25 million plus EBITDA, right? And so, it's really looking and having conversations with family office, right? Everything else is part of that structure. We've got a firm that, that'll have a $10 million EBITDA. So on that aspect, it's, yes, you have them. They're just less out there because law firms are typically so public for their marketing. For us or anybody else to really push and say, hey, here's this large law firm in this geographic region, it would give too much information away. So most of those are, private market, non-disclosed opportunities, but they are definitely out there. And that's really what is moving the space. That's what we like to deal with, of course, from that side. And then, it's finding, again, the family office or private equity who's more of a buy and hold strategy that would, be interested in that opportunity.
Yeah, fantastic. And we do have one more question coming in from the audience here. And Charlie McCarthy has helped promote this podcast episode in particular. So I want to make sure his question gets answered. So I actually going to put this one up on the screen. What do you think about the concept of social capital when it comes to acquiring a firm with a well-known lawyer that is ingrained in their community? So any best practices in terms of transition timeline, keeping the target owner on board, how to ease this burden a little bit, because we do see lawyers as really important community members, especially in some of these smaller towns.
Yep, absolutely. I always tell everybody value of a law firm is typically made up of like the business value or entity value plus, right, that personal goodwill value that the lawyer has or anything else. And so that's a key component, right? Social capital. Those are the referrals they have, right? The brand they have in the community. They're known in their legal associations, anything else. And so knowing how to deal with those under a transition plan is huge. And for us, we usually see due diligence as financial, operational, legal, funding, but transition plan has to be part of it. And really to where the seller kind of goes through and says, hey, here's my top referral sources, right? Going through those different aspects, and you develop the baton pass. It's not a throw of the keys in that world, right? And so it's really the baton pass of, okay, I'm going to introduce you. And I tell everybody, transition planning when you're a seller of a firm is kind of like a funny dance. It's like you're going and you're introducing, and like, you kind of take two steps back, and then, the client sometimes, or, the referral source is like, great, Josh, great to meet you, right? And then they forget about Tom. But others are, others you kind of are like, hey, meet Josh. And they're like, oh, great. Nice to meet you, Josh. Hey, Tom, I wanted to ask you this question I had. And so then you find yourself kind of moseying back up, right? And it is sometimes that, weird dance process or anything else, but it's part of it. And typically the sellers want to be part of it, meaning they built these relationships and they want to see it, carry forward. And most of the time, the financial structure on payout is tied to success. And so they're happy to do it for that. But really, it's that legacy and the relationships that they have. So transition planning and how that baton is passed is a key part of law firm due diligence. So that's a great question, Charlie. And one that, of course, we didn't touch on that much, but I would definitely make sure is part of your due diligence in any law firm acquisition.
Fantastic. Well, Tom, I think we did it. I don't see any more questions in the chat. This has been truly one of my favorite episodes that we've done. Fascinating. I love these niche topics because, we talk a lot about the blocking and tackling of small business M&A all the time on this podcast through all of our content. And to really dig deep on a topic that I know so little about and to really learn along with our audience with you, it's just been fantastic. So thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. Josh, thanks for having me.
Of course, please, give Tom a follow on Twitter. I believe it's at Law Practice EXCH on Twitter, or X, I guess. I have trouble calling it X. I am at Levine JM. You can find us and our company with Private Market Labs at Private Market. Follow us on YouTube. Subscribe to our channel. We have these podcasts every 2 weeks. So please stay tuned for the next one. And Tom, thank you again. And we'll wrap this up.
All right. Thanks, Josh. Thanks, everyone.